Meet Ikki Kurogane, the guy who puts the word failed in the Guinness Book of Records. Why? Because in a world where knights summon fire swords and ice dragons, this dude's magical power is weaker than the Wi-Fi signal in my basement. But life's about to change when he accidentally walks in on Stella Vermilion, a literal fire-breathing tsundere princess in the middle of her wardrobe malfunction or whatever that was. And guess what? They end up sharing a room. In the world today, it's a given that those born with talent are already a step ahead of everyone else. But who's to say that those who work hard can't catch up to them also? Well, let's dive into the story of Kurogane Ikki, a young guy who hopes to become a magic knight through his hard work and dedication. Although he's got quite a lot to work on apart from his sword skills. For example, and this one seems obvious, how to act in front of people. One morning after his usual training session, he came back to the hostel to freshen up before class. But to his not-so-unpleasant surprise, he saw a very cute girl changing in his room. Now, in this moment, the right and sensible thing to do would be to apologize and step away till she's finished dressing, right? I mean, he can always ask questions when she's done. But no, this block-headed son of a doorknob decided to strip as well, so it would be even. Of course, she gave him a heavy slap and screamed for help. A few minutes later, Ikki was in the director's office explaining himself. He wasn't doing a good job of that. But shortly after, the girl he walked in on came into the office. Her name was Stella Vermilion. Ikki apologized to her profusely, and she accepted his apology, on the condition that he take his own life. Ikki immediately refused, as he should. I should unalive myself just because I saw you undressed? Girl, please! You're not that important. Get over yourself. Okay, Ikki didn't say all of that, but he didn't have to. Because once he belittled seeing her undressed, she got furious and started burning with the fury of 100 suns. Ikki feared for his life, but once he told her that she was just too beautiful to look away from, she blushed and couldn't think straight anymore. Sigh, women. But Ikki was still confused as to why she was in his room. That's where the director came in. She told them that they would be sharing a room from now on. Apparently, Ikki was the weakest at the academy, and to make up for it, she paired him with the strongest at the school. Stella was obviously against the idea, so the director proposed a battle to decide who makes the rules of the room. Ikki agreed, but Stella added an extra rule of whoever loses becomes the winner's slave forever. Poor Ikki. He's about to get crushed and become a servant in one day. The time for the battle came, and Ikki didn't chicken out. Well, at least he's man enough to face it head on. Stella gave him a last chance to back out, but he refused, saying that he would face her eventually in the upcoming festival, and it was better now than later. And so they began. Stella went full tilt from the jump, but Ikki blocked all her attacks. Only barely, though. He noticed she wasn't just all talent, but he didn't let that get to him. He managed to get around her attacks and land a hit, but her magic was too strong to cut through. Meanwhile, Stella was furious that she had to use her magic to beat the supposed weakest in the academy. She pulled out her ultimate move, but Ikki had an ultimate of his own. He parried and slipped through her attacks and finally landed the winning strike. Darn, didn't see that coming at all. Ikki for the win. Later, Stella was resting in the hospital. The director came and told her the real truth about Ikki. Stella was upset to hear it, but the director just told her to observe him. She took those instructions a little too far, though. When she got to her room, she saw Ikki resting and couldn't control herself from getting a feel of his toned body. Ikki woke up and was so confused. Stella got startled and hit her head. After he patched her up, he calmly reminded her of their little bonus agreement about the loser being a slave. Stella refused at first, but she had no choice but to accept eventually. Ikki gave her first order and told her he'd like to know her better, to which she agreed also. And so, their adventure as roommates began. While out on his normal run, Stella joined in to also get some exercise, even though she could barely keep up. Ikki offered her a sports drink after their run. Stella went tomato red when he did, saying that it was an indirect kiss. Ikki tried being a gentleman and retracted his offer, but the lustful Stella grabbed the bottle and slurped every inch of it. Yeah, totally low-key Stella. I'm sure he'll never find out. She noticed that Ikki was smiling and asked why. He said that his sister was enrolling today. Stella got curious and asked for some more details, but once she heard what she wanted to, she approved and carried on. Yeah, Ikki is definitely not getting any girls while Stella is around. She'll just burn them all up for staring at him for too long. Lustful witch. Later that day, in class, their homeroom teacher introduced herself as Yuri and was addressing the class. She reminded them of the director's new combat selection rule concerning the selection process. After all the announcements, Yuri proceeded to vomit blood randomly. Apparently, she vomits one liter every day. How is she still alive? Iki told her to be careful, but she told him not to worry. Turns out Yuri was the reason Iki could enroll in the school, even though last year was unfortunate for him. Stella asked what made it unfortunate, and he told her it was because there were no criteria for ability points before he enrolled. But before he could say any more, a random girl came and pushed up her chest against his arm. What in the world is going on? Her name was Kagami, and she became a huge fan of Iki after she saw the fight between him and Stella. She wanted to do a publication about their fight, but Iki told her they would talk later. Iki ran back to Stella, but he was once again interrupted by a familiar voice. It was his sister, Shizuku. She came closer, and they started catching up a little, but before Iki knew it, he was up against a pole on the floor and locking lips with Shizuku. That is not how siblings are supposed to behave, right? Not counting the Lannisters anyway. I don't know if Iki is very lucky or just very unfortunate. Whichever it is, he's got one heck of a riz towards the ladies. Anyway, Stella dragged Shizuku away from Iki before she could show any more love towards him in public. But Shizuku didn't like that very much, so they broke out their weapons and clashed. This made them end up with a week of toilet cleaning. I personally don't think leaving those girls alone in multiple toilets is a good idea either. After school, Shizuka and Stella kept arguing, and Shizuka let it slip how Stella wouldn't understand Iki. So when she got home, she asked him to tell her about his past, and he did. From how he was treated like he didn't exist at home, to how he met his great-grandfather and got a new reason to live. After all that was said, Stella made up her mind to stick with him no matter what. And of course she meant it too literally. Because while Iki was calmly chilling in the bathroom, Stella and her lustful self decided to enter in and perform her servant duties by washing his back. Talk about down bad. One morning before class, Iki and Stella were having a little sparring session. When they were done and headed for class, Stella stopped Iki and tried asking him out on a date, but she kept stuttering. But just then, as if she had been spying on them, Shizuku texted Iki to ask the exact same thing, to which he quickly replied yes to. See that, Stella? That's called taking the initiative. Stuttering and being all cute won't get you anywhere. But of course, Stella isn't one to give up so easily, so she went with Iki anyway. Luckily for her, she didn't have to be a third wheel, because Shizuku brought her roommate as well, so all four of them went to the mall together. When they got there, Stella kept acting like the lustful witch she is. She got jealous that Shizuku was holding Iki's hand, and also when Iki helped Shizuku clean off some cream from her mouth. She tried putting some on her mouth too, but it didn't exactly have the same appeal. What a hopeless simp. Later, Iki and Shizuku's roommate Alice went to the bathroom together. There, Alice realized all the nice things Shizuku said about Iki to him were true, but that sweet memory was cut short when Alice noticed a bad presence. Turns out some robbers had broken into the mall and held everyone hostage. Why does this always happen when the main character decides to go to the mall? The robbers really didn't have any other better days to do this? Anyway, Alice used his device to help him and Iki slip through unnoticed and call the director to find out what was going on. The director didn't waste any time briefing them, and she even authorized the use of their devices off campus too. Now that's a woman. Stella, are you taking notes? Of course she wasn't. She was too busy trying to be the hero of the hostages and stood up to them. She demanded to meet their boss, and he appeared shortly after. The boss was called Bisho, and he looked like a nerd who had played every dating sim out there. Bisho brought out a gun to kill one of the hostages as punishment for letting her kid loose, but Stella wasn't about to let that happen. She dashed at him and struck him with her device, but he absorbed her attack and gave it right back to her. He then told Stella that if she wanted to let the hostages go free, she should strip naked and beg him. Stella reluctantly agreed and started taking her clothes off. Iki could barely stand to watch this, gripping his palm hard enough to make it bleed, but Alice stopped him and told him to wait a while longer. Turns out, Shizuku was preparing Basamzucker Kara barrier, and as soon as it was up, Iki dashed down and sliced Bisho's arm clean off. Bisho asked his lackeys to attack, but they were taken out by Stella. Bisho still had one trick up his sleeve though, an ally in the midst of the hostages. But that advantage didn't last long before someone came and knocked them both out. It was an old acquaintance of Iki's, Kirihara, a former representative of the academy at the battle festival. Iki went over to thank Kirihara after the whole thing had calmed down, but Kirihara laughed in his face. Turns out, Kirihara had some bad blood with Iki, and to make things worse, Iki was facing him in the combat selection. The day of the 7-star swordsmanship qualifying tournament was here, and the first match was Stella versus Momoitani, also known as Heavy Tank. But, despite his cool name, he lost his nerve and forfeited the match before it even began. When Stella got back home, she greeted Ikki, who was watching videos of Kirihara's previous fights. Ikki realized that he was a terrible matchup for Kirihara, but as usual, he wasn't going to give up, and he figured out a way he could win. Later that night, Ikki went for a jog and bumped into Alice. Alice asked him about the incident with Kirihara last year, and once Ikki told him about it, Alice concluded that Ikki was pretty much screwed in the mind. He'd gotten so used to pain that he didn't even consider it as a big deal anymore. Damn, that's deep. The next day, Ikki was headed to the arena with his gang. Stella offered to stay with him till his match was about to start, but he declined and decided to focus solely on his match, which was a good idea. That lustful witch would have just made him lose even more focus, probably. When it was time for the match, Ikki stepped in and met Kirihara. Kirihara kept joking the whole time, and deployed his device's ability, the one that made him undetectable. Ikki had a plan to trace the direction of his arrows to find him, but that plan was quickly foiled when Kirihara showed that he could make even his arrows undetectable, too. Ikki was in some deep trouble, getting pierced everywhere. You'd think he was a troubled goth teen. Stella was in the stands about to cry. She couldn't believe she didn't notice how nervous he was. It's the first time he's been in an official match, of course he'd be nervous. But you wouldn't know that, would you, Stella? When you're always focused on the wrong thing. Kirihara added salt to injury and started blabbing about how Ikki couldn't graduate without winning the swordsmanship festival. Everyone in the crowd started laughing. Stella couldn't take it anymore. She yelled out at everyone and told them not to make fun of her knight. Then she turned that same energy towards Ikki and told him to not lose to Kirihara. Ikki stood back up and punched himself in the face to get his mind together. Once he did, he locked all the way in and quickly analyzed Kirihara's technique. Once that was done, he unleashed some killer moves and got close enough to Kirihara that he started to pathetically beg for his life. Where's all that energy from earlier now, Kirihara? Don't switch up now, fight back. Bro screamed louder than me when I see a cockroach just before Ikki landed the final blow 1 millimeter short. Kirihara passed out from the shock and the match was given to Ikki, but he passed out shortly after too. When he came to, Stella was at his bedside. After she threw a fit of how worried he made her, Ikki straight up told her that he liked her. Stella obviously felt the same, but was too shy to say it. Instead, she gave him a kiss on the cheek. Really? Now you get shy? Unbelievable. Ikki pulled her in and gave her a long hug, and they both promised to keep getting stronger together. Ikki was now on a 5-match win streak ever since his victory against Kirihara, and because of this, some of the girls wanted to learn some sword techniques from him. Sword techniques, huh? Anyway, Ikki agreed, much to the displeasure of Stella. When they got back to their rooms, Stella teased him about being too soft-hearted, saying that he was training his potential opponents in the future. Ikki didn't mind it. He thought back to the robbery and figured that any of the girls could have been in that situation. So, he wanted to help them get stronger in any way he could. Such a pure-hearted gentleman. Stella, on the other hand, was focused on the wrong thing once again. Just after Ikki gave his beautiful speech trying to help the girls, she wanted to do lovers-like stuff with him since they had been dating for 2 weeks now. But Ikki was fast asleep already. The next day, Ikki started his lessons with Kagami and the girls. While he was doing that, some guys came and tried to intimidate him. And this is what I don't understand. Why would you try to intimidate a guy who beat someone that was seemingly invisible? Do you not have a working brain? I doubt these guys do. After Ikki made quick work of them, they confessed that they were just jealous of him and wanted to be strong and popular like him. Ikki, once again being the gentleman that he is, took them under his wing and began training them right away. Before long, Ikki had more and more people joining him. Later that night, Stella was at home playing a game that Alice lent to her while thinking about how she and Ikki still hadn't done anything couple-like. Ikki walked in just then and told her that he was going to the pool with his newfound students tomorrow and wanted her to come along. She asked why she should since he wasn't teaching her, but he explained why. Apparently, her fighting style was basically too good for him to add any real improvement to it. That's why he didn't offer to teach her as well. Obviously, hearing this made her feel very special throughout the ride to the pool center. When they got there, Stella put on her best swimsuit for Ikki, but he was more focused on the training program. Stella got bored and went off somewhere to try doing a little practice of her own, but Kagami snuck up on her and asked for the gist of what had been going on with her and Ikki. Stella told her that they hadn't done anything yet, and Kagami gave her some advice that should have been obvious to her. Simply tell him that you want to do stuff. Once Stella understood that her being reluctant could make him withdraw, Kagami told her to wait as she went to call Ikki over. When he got there, he basically said what was on Stella's mind. Turns out the poor guy had been trying to get some action too, but he didn't want to seem pushy or perverted. So, they both said out loud that they wanted to kiss. And they did just that, finally coming to terms with their nasty-minded nature. On the bus ride home, they both got an email of their next opponents. there were two members of the student council. In their matches against the student council members, both Ikki and Stella faced them with their different abilities. But ultimately, neither of the council members were strong enough to give Ikki or Stella a fight, and they lost badly. With that, Ikki's win streak continued. On their way home, Shizuku kept clinging to Ikki the whole time. Stella was obviously pissed off, but Shizuku refused to back down. Crazy how Stella keeps getting jealous of Shizuku when she literally shares a room with Ikki. You've got a whole night plus a few hours to do whatever you want with him every single day. Stop being so needy, it's not very demure. While the girls were clawing at each other, Alice told Ikki to do something about the stalker that had been following them. Ikki didn't want to mention it at first, but he figured there's no point being quiet anymore. He went to meet the girl stalker. She got startled and tried running away, but she fell into a little pond. When the girl came to in the hospital, she introduced herself as Ayatsuji Ayase. She was the daughter of a famous swordsman. In fact, her father was a big inspiration for Ikki when he just started training. But that's beside the point. The whole reason she was stalking Ikki was to ask him for swordsmanship tips. From behind a tree? Wow, how smart and efficient. Ikki was pretty much over the whole situation, so he just asked her to train with him. The next day after school, Ikki sparred with her and discovered a flaw in her movements. So to correct it, he told her to remain still as he adjusted her body a little bit. Although the adjustments were not what Ayase was expecting, Ikki was getting real handsy with her. But, of course, he was too focused on the sword training to have any lewd thoughts. He's a better man than me, that's for sure. Once he had adjusted her, she tried moving and it felt much better. Later that night, Stella called out to Ikki and asked how he felt touching Ayase's body. Ikki assured her that it was all just for training's sake, and she was the only one he loved. He reinforced those words with a kiss, and they went to bed. Over the next few days, Ayase kept getting stronger thanks to the training. One night, she decided to treat Ikki and Stella to anything they liked. While they were enjoying their time together, a bunch of ruffians and hooligans barged in and started making advances toward Ayase. Ikki stepped in and told them to stop, but all it got him was a glass bottle to the head. Oh darn, this just got real. The leader of the hooligans, Kuraudo, egged Ikki on to fight, but he just smiled. Stella wasn't having any of it, but Ikki firmly grabbed her and told her to sit down. Kuraudo spat on Ikki and walked away. While Ikki cleaned himself up, a bunch of council members came and commended him for not reacting. Turns out, Kuraudo was in the top 10 of last year's festival. The council member healed up Ikki, and they headed home. What a bunch of useless council members. They're just gonna let all that slide? This is why I hate politics. On the way, Ikki asked Ayase what her connection to that guy was. But before she could answer, they both got an email saying they were each other's opponents for the next match. Ayase proceeded to avoid Ikki for a few days, but the day before the match, Ayase asked Ikki to meet her on the rooftop. Just what could she be planning? Ikki met with Ayase on the roof as she requested, but things didn't go as smoothly as he hoped. Turns out, Ayase is a suicidal maniac, and without warning, she just jumped backwards off the roof. I knew she had her screws loose from the moment she was stalking Ikki. Ikki didn't waste any time, and he used his ultimate move, Ito Shura, to go after her and save her. But it was all according to her plan. She knew he'd use it to save her. Ikki has a limit of using that move only once a day, and now there wasn't any time to recover before the match. What a sneaky, conniving little witch. Ikki stumbled all the way home and into the bosom of Stella. When she woke up, she thought he wanted to do some night training, if you know what I mean. But she soon realized he needed help and rushed him to the hospital. When he came to, Stella and the gang were there waiting for him. He was worried about his match, but Stella told him he still had plenty of time to relax. But that didn't last long before the director summoned him to her office. She wanted to find out what happened last night, but Ikki didn't rat out Ayase. This is no time to be a gentleman, you nincompoop. Rat that witch out. The director figured he was covering the real story and didn't pressure him, but Ikki asked her about Ayase's father. The director was hesitant to tell him anything at first, but when she finally agreed to talk, Ikki had already figured out that it was Kuraudo who made him retire as a swordsman. Sheesh. Why'd you even ask then? Well, that explains why she wants to win the match so badly. She wants to fight Kuraudo in the 7-Star Battle Festival and defeat him, but she's doing a very cowardly job of getting to that point. Once that was settled, Ikki went ahead and got ready for his match. When he entered and faced Ayase, she was surprised that he showed up. She really wanted to win by default. How low will this witch go? As soon as the match started, Ayase used her device's ability to cut Ikki multiple times. She had set traps in the air before the match to get the upper hand. As if making Ikki use his ultimate move earlier wasn't enough. I really hate this girl. The match seemed to be coming to an end with how Ikki was bleeding out, but when Ayase went in for the final blow, Ikki blocked it, and they went back to neutral. "Oh man, my emotions can't handle this." Ikki realized that Ayase was scared and couldn't perform properly, and called her out on her nonsense. Ayase tried denying it, so Ikki decided to beat some sense into her, or rather, her pride as a swordsman, and he did just that. He perfectly dodged all her attacks and landed a clean hit on her. Ayase was brought to her knees and began crying. She thought all hope of beating Kuraudo was lost, but Ikki stretched his hand out to her and she asked him to help her. Ikki smiled and wholeheartedly agreed. A few days had passed since their match. Now Ayase and Ikki were heading towards the former dojo of the Ayatsuji family. While they were heading there, Stella did some background checks on Kuraudo to get a grasp on the kind of person he was. Ayase mentioned that he beat her father for the dojo without even using his device, meaning he was a skilled swordsman. Yeah, sure, Glaze the guy who hospitalized your dad and ran you out of your home, fish brain. When they got there, Ikki saw the guys who tried roughing Ayase up back at the restaurant, and he had a nice, long conversation about the wonders of martial arts with them. For those who don't follow, he beat them up. Ikki then stepped into the dojo and challenged Kuraudo to a duel. Kuraudo admired his boldness, but he wanted to know if Ikki was worth the effort. As soon as Ikki showed him the IDs of his lackeys outside, he immediately called forth his device and charged at him excitedly. They quickly began to exchange blows, but Ikki was mostly on the defensive. He was analyzing his fighting style, and before long he was able to figure it out. The reason Kuraudo is formidable with his sword is because of his reaction speed. He was able to react in less than 0.05 seconds, which allowed him to pull off some crazy moves. While Kuraudo was impressed that Ikki figured out his skill, he still wondered if he could do anything about it, so he increased his attack speed. Ikki was backed into a corner and forced to keep his guard up, yet for some reason, he was smiling the whole time, which I can't understand. Did he forget why they're there and just started enjoying the fight? What are you, a scion? While they were both enjoying the fight, Ayase realized that her father's last words before entering a coma wasn't an apology to her. It was an apology to Kuraudo for being too weak to give him a real challenge. With all that now out in the open, Ikki took a very different stance with the intention of ending the match with one last strike. It was the same stance that Ayase's father took when he wanted to defeat Kuraudo too. The Ayatsuji family's ultimate move, Ten Imuhu. Kuraudo noticed as Ikki was charging at him that he was using the same technique, so out of respect, he faced it head-on as well, and they clashed, with Ikki coming out as the winner. Kuraudo forfeited ownership of the dojo as agreed upon and left. A few days later, Ikki and Stella were relaxing out in the woods and talking about how Ayase turned herself in for cheating in the match. They suspended her as well for it. Serves her right, all that snake activity she was doing should be punished severely. But at least she had some good news. Her father had woken up from his coma. Stella and Ikki snuggled up next to each other, but Shizuku and Alice interrupted and startled them. Stella and Shizuku immediately started their verbal warfare, while Ikki just stood there laughing nervously. Stella and Ikki had won their 12th consecutive match, and the director thought it was a great idea to give them a week off school. Technically, they were going to a training camp, but I'm sure Stella has all sorts of nasty ideas to try out being the lustful witch she is. And boy, was I right. As soon as they got there, Stella started acting all cute to attract his attention, and before long, she was already going in for a kiss. Keep your lips to yourself, you lustful witch. Ikki suddenly pushed her away and braced himself as he noticed something far off. It was the student council. Stella wasted no time in challenging one of them to badminton, but with the way they were playing it, it was more like a safety hazard. While that was going on, Ikki asked why the council was there. They told him it was because of an errand they had to run. And here's where I realized that the director is quite the conniving snake herself. Turns out, the reason she sent Ikki and Stella on that trip was so they could help the council members clean up the residence where the festival participants would be training at. So, Ikki and Stella spent the bulk of the day cleaning. But once they were done, Ikki told the council that he and Stella wanted to go see the waterfall. He's trying to make the most of the trip. What a guy. Halfway to the waterfall, Ikki noticed Stella was acting strange. He suggested they head back if she was feeling sick, but of course, being the lustful witch she is, she didn't want to pass up on the chance of them being alone together, so she told Ikki she was fine and kept going. Needless to say, her tough guy act didn't last long. She soon became unable to move on her own, and what's worse, rain started falling. Are you happy now, you lustful witch? Now you're gonna drag Ikki into more stress. Anyway, thanks to Ikki, they found a small wooden cabin to stay in for the night. Ikki saw that Stella might have a cold, so he took her clothes off so she'd get warm faster. He also took his own off first so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. Again, why is that something he thinks is all right? Some time passed and Stella suddenly asked Ikki if he wanted to get jiggy with her. I just knew she was waiting for her chance to pull something like this. Even as she's sick, her lewd nature persists. Thank goodness Iki is such a gentleman. He told her that he didn't want to go that far until he could proudly tell everyone about their relationship. So, Stella went to sleep and Iki stayed on guard. Iki then heard a noise and went to check it out. It was a huge rock monster and it was about to crush the house. Iki managed to save Stella and even destroy the monster, but it just came back together and pushed Iki back. Iki couldn't make it in time to save Stella, but the council came and saved his butt, followed along by the president who unleashed an attack so powerful, it affected the person controlling the monsters from dozens of miles away. Her name, Todo Tuka. It was a new day, and there were some very exciting new developments in the tournament. Shizuku was set to face the student council president, Tuka. Iki was very worried about the match. He had seen firsthand just how powerful Tuka and her lightning-style device was. He didn't want Shizuku to push herself tomorrow. Iki heard that she was training with some high-level lightning users to prepare for the fight, but he was still worried. So, Stella went to meet Shizuku in the stalls as she was showering to tell her that Iki was worried about her and ask if she was okay. Once that was done, Stella went away. Then along came Alice. Why is he in the stalls with them? Who let him in? And why is Shizuku okay with him seeing her naked? I've got so many questions. Well, my questions can wait because Shizuku was sad that Iki didn't trust her enough to handle the match well. She vowed to become even stronger so that Iki would recognize her skills and see her in a different light. The next day came, and it was time for Shizuku to face Tuka. The crowd went wild when they both entered the arena, but Shizuku was focused on winning from the jump. They both didn't move an inch for the first few minutes of the match, trying to analyze the best way to attack. Finally, Shizuku made a move, and the fight was on. Tuka used brute force to counter all of Shizuku's attacks, and eventually, Shizuku was on defense. Shizuku then laid a trap and froze Tuka in place to try and finally get her, but Tuka managed to escape it. Now they were set back to neutral and observing again. Shizuku kept wondering how Tuka dodged her attack. But as she was thinking about that, Tuka closed the gap between them immediately and slashed Shizuku. Shizuku managed to evade it with a water clone, but she still got damaged. Why on earth are you spacing out in the middle of the match? Are you dumb or just plain stupid? Shizuku was confused. How did Tuka close the gap without her noticing? Well, Iki broke it down. Tuka was using a technique called Nukiyashi. It was used to basically bypass the human senses and attack, and Shizuku had no idea how to defend against it. At this point, all signs pointed to Shizuku losing the match, but she wasn't going to give up that easily. She used her water to heal her wounds and took a fighting stance once again. This time, she unleashed an arena-wide attack. From freezing her sword still to attacking her from all angles with clones, Shizuku tried it all, but Tuka cut through everything. So, as a last effort, Shizuku created a mist that only she can move in. She then rushed Tuka with a barrage of clones and finally went in for the last strike. But Tuka pulled out her ultimate move, Raikiri, and the match was over. When Shizuku came to in the hospital and saw the gang there, she asked to be alone for a bit. Iki and Stella left, but Alice stayed and comforted her. He told her she did a good job and she broke down crying. Isn't that what Iki was supposed to do? What a blockhead of a brother. Meanwhile, back at the Kurogane home, something very suspicious was brewing. Stella had won all 14 of her matches, and she was a step closer to the promise she made with Iki. It was the same for Iki as well, winning all 14 of his matches. This made the director call him and Stella to his office. She asked Iki if he knew a certain man that had been snooping around the school, and Iki did. The man was named Akaza, and Iki knew him well. Apparently, he had hated Iki from the moment he saw him. Probably because of how handsome Iki is, because this Akaza guy looks hideous. He literally looks like poop, but with a face. After they left the director's office, they went to see the council members, and the first thing Iki saw when he opened the door was the president in a not-so-decent manner. Turns out she was a major klutz when she wasn't on the battlefield. For real, the difference is night and day. But that was by the way. The reason the council called Iki and Stella was so they could help out at an old orphanage home where the president and some of the other council members were from. Mainly Stella, because she was so popular. While all of that was going on, Iki couldn't take his eyes off of the president for some reason and kept staring at her from afar. Okay, slow it down, Iki. You've got a girlfriend. Don't start getting any ideas that will make you look like a buffoon. Well, my worries were for nothing, because it was all just admiration. He admired that she used her power for people and that her source of said power was the happiness of those little kids. Iki wondered what the source of his power was on the way back home, but all that became irrelevant as soon as they got off the bus. Shizuku and the gang ran to give Iki and Stella some bad news. Quite literally, they were in the newspaper kissing, and it has become a state problem. And of course, guess who shows up to take Iki away to prison? None other than Poop Face himself, Akaza. Akaza took Ikki away to a private court hearing where he was questioned for doing indecent things to Stella, the princess of a noble family. Ikki pled innocent, but of course they weren't buying it. Akaza was striving to make sure Ikki got expelled and his image ruined, so he kept Ikki locked up for a whole week, with him calling Ikki to court on different days in between, and also making him have his selection matches in the prison facilities. Darn, they're really treating him like a criminal. Stella, I hope you're happy. You got this poor guy imprisoned because of your lewd activities. Even though the situation seemed bleak, Ikki pushed forward, with the hope that he'd see Stella soon. Man, Ikki is too good for that lustful witch, honestly. After almost 2 weeks, Ikki asked to meet his father to directly plead his innocence. Surprisingly, he got his wish, thanks to the director pulling some strings. But it was all for nothing. When he met his father, he got hit with a sad reality. His father was so uninterested in him that he didn't even want Ikki to do anything with his life. Ikki was broken hearing this, but that wasn't the worst of it. For his final selection match, he was to go up against Tuka, and if he lost, he'd stay imprisoned and banned from being a magic knight. That's way too cruel, man. Poor Ikki. Ikki was in the worst condition ever. He was low on sleep, low on energy, and he could barely think straight. Being in that prison for so long made him look like our not-so-friendly neighborhood hobo. Everyone was on edge about the final matches for the selection, especially Shizuku and Stella. Shizuku met with Tuka for a talk, and Tuka advised her to tell Ikki to withdraw from the match. Shizuku thought about it and really considered it. Ikki was in no form to fight anyone, let alone someone as powerful as Tuka. That poop-faced jerk Akaza really set Ikki up for failure. He even made the matches to be streamed live on TV so the whole Japan could see Ikki fail. Sheesh, why go to all these lengths? How much can you hate one person? Akaza even got front row seats for the match to see Ikki fail. Meanwhile, Akaza had made Ikki walk all the way from the facility to school with his already bad condition and state of mind. Ikki was really put through the ringer on his way to school. He had to deal with so many bad thoughts and he almost considered giving up. But Shizuku caught up to him in time, and along with a bunch of other students, she gave Ikki words of encouragement and told him to keep going. And while everyone was cheering him on, Stella came with her stupid medal to tell Ikki that she had qualified for the festival. Really, Stella? Of all times to brag, you chose now? As if getting him locked up wasn't enough. Who let this knuckle-headed nincompoop here anyway? Elsewhere, Tuka heard the news that Ikki had arrived. She stood up and steeled her resolve to go meet him. Once they got to the arena, Tuka could see just how worn out Ikki was, but she was still excited to fight him. Ikki also swore to face her with his strongest and not disappoint. And he really did mean it, because once the match started, Ikki busted Iroshura out immediately. He knew that a drawn-out match in his state would be pointless, so he decided to put his all into one single attack instead of the usual 1 minute that Iroshura lasts for. Tuka responded with the same energy and put all her energy into her most powerful Raikiri attack. They leapt forward and clashed, but just before they did, Ikki pushed himself past all forms of human limits, and he broke through Tuka's attack, giving him the victory. Poopface wasn't happy with the results, so he went down to try and end Ikki himself, but Stella swiped him away like a fly and reached out for Ikki. Ikki could barely stand, but he mustered up enough strength to do the craziest thing. He, flipping, proposed to Stella on live TV, and of course, she said yes. Everyone couldn't believe their eyes and ears. Shizuku couldn't even complain because she was just happy that Ikki had finally found some happiness. The next day, the director announced the representatives for the school in the festival. Ikki, Stella, and Alice made it through. Not sure when Alice became so strong, though. That guy is just full of mysteries. Tuka came forward and announced Ikki and the leader of the team for the festival, and as she handed him the school flag, she was filled with so much pride. Ikki looked at Stella with a huge smile on his face as the school acknowledged and cheered for him. Later that day, Ikki wanted to talk to Stella about the proposal, but Shizuku came and butt in their middle. That wraps up another epic journey with our favorite underdog knight Ikki and the fierce Stella.